We begin in Israel, where 4 female soldiers held captive in Gaza for nearly 500 days have been reunited with their families. They were released by Hamas in return for 200 Palestinian prisoners and detainees held in Israeli jails. It was the second exchange since a fragile ceasefire took effect last weekend to pause the 15-month-long war. The exchange triggered jubilation among both Israelis and Palestinians.
It's the moment they've been waiting for. After 477 days in captivity in Gaza, Liri Albag is reunited with her parents. In footage published by the Israeli army, she expressed gratitude to her country. I love you all, the people of Israel who supported our families and embraced them, and all the soldiers that did everything for us. Thank you. I love you. Albag is one of 4 female soldiers freed on Saturday morning by Hamas militants in a highly choreographed ceremony in Gaza City. After being paraded on a stage surrounded by masked Hamas fighters, the young women were transferred to the Red Cross before being passed to the Israeli army, who then transported them out of the Palestinian territory. Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv's Hostage Square, thousands of Israelis gathered to watch the hostage release broadcast live on screens. While there was elation across Israel, there were also emotional scenes in the occupied West Bank city of Ramallah, where crowds of Palestinians celebrated the arrival of buses carrying dozens of prisoners released from Israeli jails. For many Palestinian families, the release of the prisoners was a huge relief.
I simply can't express my emotion about being freed in this deal. Thank you to everyone. We hope that other prisoners will also be freed.
Among the 200 Palestinians who were released on Saturday, 121 were serving life sentences. Some remained in the West Bank, while several dozen were transferred to Gaza. A total of 70 Palestinians were expelled to Egypt, from where they'll be deported to Tunisia, Algeria, and Turkey, which all agreed to receive them. In southern Gaza, thousands of displaced Palestinians are waiting to return to their neighborhoods in the north as part of the ceasefire agreement. But Israel announced Saturday that it would block such returns until the release of a female Israeli civilian hostage is secured. 29-year-old Arbel Yehud was not among those freed on Saturday, as expected. Israel called it a breach of the truce, while Hamas said it was due to a technical issue and that she would be released next week.
Shani Rosanes is our Middle East analyst and joins me in the studio now. Shani, the 4 hostages have been freed, but what do we know about their mental and physical state?
Well, I think physically they're better than many people may have expected. We see them walking quite strong, seem to be, of course, this is such a surreal, unexpected situation. They were better than I think many in Israel expected. We still don't know much about where they were kept, whether they were kept together, where they were kept in tunnels or up on the ground with some families. We know this is what happened to several of the other hostages that gave their accounts of what happened. They're still undergoing, some checkups, but it's quite clear it's going to take time after almost 500 days in captivity for them to regain, their sense of self, old selves. Israel is watching very carefully, but also this is a very bittersweet day because there's always remembering those who were not released and always the fear of what happens to the remaining 65 that should be released once this first phase of the deal is over.
And the Palestinians who were freed into Gaza and also Egypt, what do we know about them?
Another bittersweet event, if you talk about the Palestinians. Some of them, the youngest of those released is 15, the oldest one is almost 70, and he was kept in prison in Israel since 1985. And still, he is not going back to the West Bank where he's from, but rather was deported to Egypt, which is the only place where he could see his family now after all this time. Even though it's a bit different with the prisoners, it depends on their conditions. Many of them have had the chance to have contact with their families. Still, nonetheless, after such a long time in prison, people do expect to be home, and Israel does not allow it. So this is also for the Palestinians not an easy situation. We need to keep in mind, though, however, that this is a great achievement for Hamas. The prisoners as a topic in the Palestinian society is a very big one, and Hamas being able to bring out some of them very much known among the Palestinian public for what they have done, celebrated as martyrs. Many of them have been convicted for various terror acts against Israelis. Of course, for Hamas, this is a great statement, along with the photos that we've seen of the release of the hostages, the female hostages. Hamas is standing, Hamas is strong, and 15 months in, after the war has started, it doesn't seem to be, going anywhere.
And I understand that the Israeli government is saying that there is a fifth hostage that they had expected released, a civilian woman. What do we know about that? And now it looks like Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is retaliating by not allowing Palestinians into North Gaza. Tell us more.
So this deal was in the making for so long, and every detail was considered, for so many, what could be the different scenarios. And the two main principles that Israel set was first the female and first the civilians. And of course, you're a female civilian, then you are the first in line. And one of those that was supposed to be released, according to Israel's account, was a 29-year-old woman taken from her house in a kibbutz near the border. And the fact that she was not released, for Israel, it meant also because for civilians, other kind of prisoners will be released and a different kind of prisoners will be released. They felt like Hamas might be trying to play with this, trying to hold back and bring out the prisoner soldiers to get higher ranking Palestinians released for them. Either way, this is just to show you how much mistrust and how fragile there is when it comes to this deal. Every tiny detail is up for negotiations, and nobody wants to be seen weaker. Nobody. We are seeing those. This is just a second in. We are expecting 5 more of these days of releases. And Israel feels, okay, we need to set this border, we need to set this red line before Hamas erodes more and more of what we've agreed on. On the other hand, what we've been seeing in Gaza, there's a main road, the Salah ad-Din road in the central part of Gaza that's supposed to be opening for vehicle movement, but people have been walking along the coast from the south up to the north, trying to go back to their houses. Israel basically dissected the Gaza Strip, we're seeing the map here, between north and south. And for Hamas to be able to bring the citizens who had to flee from their houses in the north back up north, that's a very big part of showing here we are, we've won. There's very big public pressure on Hamas, and Israel is trying to use this, which is something that she's agreed on the deal, in order to leverage its position and bring back that civilian. Because when there's no trust that Hamas says she's fine and she'll be released next week, they're saying we don't trust you. We need more than that. We're keeping this ace up our sleeve a little longer until we get better guarantees.
And you talk about the details and how little trust there is. So what are the next steps in all these details, assuming that the ceasefire holds?
Well, so the first step would be to allow Gazans to go back to their houses, whatever is left from their houses in the north of the Strip. The devastation is unbelievable in Gaza, in the northern part as well, not just in the south. So that would be the first thing, the first major block to be removed in order for the deal to go on. If that is removed tomorrow, we will see then another release of 3 more Israeli hostages next week, and so another 3 in the week after. And every batch of 3 prisoners, hostages, Israeli hostages released, will bring also a release of prisoners, Palestinian prisoners. Again, which prisoners will be is set according to the kind of Israelis being released. If the soldiers get, the token for them, the exchange rate for them, it's so cynical, but this is how it is different than those of civilians and so on. In total, we're expecting by the 42nd day to have 33 Israelis released, most of them alive, though not all of them, and almost 2,000 Palestinian prisoners and detainees.
Middle East analyst Shani Rosanes, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Lisa.
And next, I am joined by Mayrav Zonzang. She is a senior analyst with the International Crisis Group in Tel Aviv. Hello, Mayrav. Thanks for joining us.
Hey.
Israel accuses Hamas of failing to release that civilian hostage we were talking about just now, Arbel Yahoud, today. What do you think is behind this?
Well, to be honest, I don't really know. I saw reports that Islamic Jihad is the one that is actually holding her. This is a different faction. And for some reason, they consider her to be a soldier. So they have said that they would only release her next week when the soldiers are supposed to be released. or not as a civilian at least, which was supposed to be today. But I honestly think that these types of hiccups and these types of problems in each side, that's something that's part of the process. And ultimately, if both sides want to see the next stage of the deal, and I think Hamas very much wants to see civilians that were displaced go back up north. Israel is now in a momentum where it would be very difficult, I think, at least in terms of public opinion, to stop. So I think both sides can easily solve this if that's what they want.
If that's what they want, but could this also potentially jeopardize the ceasefire deal?
I mean, anything could potentially jeopardize it, and there's no clear mechanism. But as long as they both want it, and Qatar and the US under Trump now have some kind of political capital, which they've put behind clinching the deal, then it would seem at this early stage that it should be able to go through. I think the real hurdles and obstacles will come once negotiations start, I think in about a week, for the second phase, and of course, all the open things that remain unresolved about the future of Gaza, the political horizon, all of the important issues that are not not at all mentioned in the ceasefire, and of course, Netanyahu's survival in Israel in his coalition. That's when it will become, I think, much more fragile than it is now.
I want to ask about that in a moment. But for now, I want to ask about the video footage of the crowd of Hamas militants in Gaza surrounding the hostages who were about to be released. Hamas is making a big show that it remains very present in Gaza. How strong are they still?
I mean, the fact of the matter is that they are the dominant entity in Gaza. They are the ones who are still calling the shots. They are the ones who have the hostages. They are the ones who administer the strip. And so they are the de facto sovereign, and there is nobody else. And Israel under Netanyahu has not discussed any other alternative. So a lot of the criticism of the way that Netanyahu has waged this war by his own military and former officials is that, why aren't you speaking about a day after? Why aren't you engaging in diplomacy? Israel has basically only used military force, and it has not discussed any options for what to do later on. And so de facto Hamas stays in power. Also, the objective of the war of destroying Hamas while at the same time returning hostages was in conflict from the get-go. So now, hopefully, all the hostages will be able to be freed. And then the real question is what kind of political process, if at all, can be had. But for now, Hamas is very clearly in power. Now, whether, I mean, they've been dismantled largely as a military, as an army. They're more of a guerrilla group now. But regardless, as I said, there's nobody else. So that's just how it is.
I want to talk a little bit more about that. And I mean, Netanyahu has in the past promised a total victory over Hamas. Has the government given up on that goal in this case?
In rhetoric, no. And I would argue that potentially Netanyahu has not really ever been committed to removing Hamas from power, because I think somebody who was actually interested in ending the hostilities and trying to find an alternative would have, as I said, engaged in other mechanisms other than military force. He's had a lot of different players, the UAE, the US, and others who have been interested from the very beginning in finding a solution or engaging in some kind of diplomacy. And we see that, I mean, Israel has destroyed the Gaza Strip. It's made it unlivable. And that hasn't really strategically changed the fact that Israel and Hamas are still in conflict, still in crisis. Both societies are still in trauma. There isn't a guarantee of security for either side. So what has this 15 months of destruction achieved? I think very little, unfortunately, and the death toll is inconceivable.
You touched on this a little earlier. I'm curious, where does all this put Netanyahu in terms of his political power? There has been moments when he looked like he could be forced to step down over the last few months, but where do things stand now?
I mean, he basically has the time for this first phase in which the finance minister, the far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has agreed to remain in the government. He can topple it if he leaves the government, and he appears to have gotten guarantees that Israel will resume the war after the first phase and not complete the hostage deal. I think it will be very difficult for Israel to resume the war in the way that it did before. But we have to wait and see, because many people in Israel are convinced that, including the families of the hostages who are at the very end of the deal, they're convinced that Netanyahu is not dedicated to completing the full deal, which would mean Israel and its troops would completely withdraw from the Gaza Strip. So that's something that if it were to occur, Netanyahu would no longer have a coalition. Presumably we would go to elections, or he would try to turn to an alternative coalition. But it's very, very fragile. And effectively, Trump, by forcing the ceasefire, has put Netanyahu in a crisis, and he has a couple of weeks to figure out what he's going to do.
Marav Zonzain with the International Crisis Group, thank you very much.
Thank you.